The year 1571 saw the Ottoman Navy at its absolute peak, its golden age, so to speak. However, it would suffer huge defeats against the navies of Christian countries in the 17th and 18th centuries. By the early 19th century, the Ottoman Navy was a small, minor navy by European standards. This changed from the 1830s onwards with the modernization of the navy at the behest of Sultan Mahmud II. The Crimean War of the 1850s had also done much to spur the Ottoman Navy. Ships were commissioned from Austria, Britain, and France, and local shipyards flourished across its empire in places like Istanbul, Izmir, Gemlik, Crete, and Basra. By 1870, the Ottoman Navy still dominated Russia in the all-important Black Sea. Russia to its north was an age-old enemy of the Ottoman Empire, with the two imperial powers constantly battling at both sea and on land over territories in the Caucasus region and Eastern Europe. At that time, the Ottoman fleet consisted of 21 warships and 173 other vessels, making it the world's third largest navy after those of Britain and France. However, the Ottoman Empire was in serious financial trouble in the late 19th century, and its navy had seen its budget continually slashed. This naval decline had been exacerbated by a new Sultan, Abdulhamid II, who came to power in 1876. He had absolutely no interest in naval matters. Under his reign, the Ottoman fleet quickly declined, with much of it obsolete by the beginning of the 20th century. Things improved for the Navy after 1909 with the coup d'etat of the so-called Young Turks. It was a hyper-nationalist movement that wanted to restore the honor and glory of the Ottoman Empire, including its navy. Plans were made to build 6 battleships, 12 destroyers, 12 torpedo boats, and 6 submersibles. However, this plan was thwarted when the Balkan War broke out in 1911 against Italy. The far larger and stronger Italian navy destroyed what there was of this reconstructed Ottoman navy. It was due to this crushing defeat that Greece was able to seize most of the islands in the Aegean Sea, which until then had been Ottoman-controlled, and most of which Greece holds to this day. And so the Ottoman Navy found itself in near tatters and in a precarious state when war broke out in 1914. That explains why the Ottomans would find themselves having to rely heavily on their ally, Germany, both at the outset of war and later. Even its naval policy was heavily influenced by German high command in Berlin. Things came to a head on August 3, 1914, when 2 dreadnoughts ships that the Ottomans had ordered were seized by the British. That order to seize the ships bound for Turkey, which had been given the names Reshadieh and Sultan Osman, was made by none other than Winston Churchill. At the time, Churchill was First Lord of the Admiralty, and thus head of the Royal Navy. The British saw it as a way of punishing the Ottomans for supporting Germany. In Turkey, there was outrage about what was viewed as treachery by the British. This only served to strengthen the Ottoman Empire's commitment in its alliance with what were the Central Powers, namely Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Bulgaria. It so happened that there were 2 German battlecruisers out in the Mediterranean at this time. The 2 German ships were the Goeben and the Breslau. The decision was made that the 2 battlecruisers be sold to the Ottomans. To achieve that, Rear Admiral Wilhelm Souchon had to somehow get the 2 ships from Alexandria in Egypt to Constantinople in Turkey, and he had to do this while being chased by a group of British and French vessels that were intent on destroying the 2 German ships before they got to Turkey. Somehow, Souchon was able to make haste through the Dardanelles Strait and arrive in Constantinople on August 11, 1914, unscathed. It was almost a miracle that those 2 German battlecruisers made it to Constantinople. The Goeben would be renamed Yavuz Sultan Selim, and the Breslau given its new Turkish name of Midilli. Interestingly, the 2 ships would be operated by German officers and sailors throughout the war. The Germans wore Turkish naval uniforms and were even given the distinctive local headgear known as the fez to also wear. They did so with aplomb. Photographs of the time indeed showed German officers and sailors wearing Turkish uniforms and donning a fez on the head. The newly named Yavuz, Sultan, Selim, and Midilli would form the backbone of the still small Ottoman Navy. However, neither warship ever saw action to the west of Turkey. Instead, the Yavuz Sultan Selim would spend most of the war bombarding Russian ports in the Black Sea to the north of Turkey. As for Midilli, she would attain her greatest offense against the Russian port of Novorossiysk on October 29, 1914. On that fateful day, Midilli, backed by German ships, was able to sink 14 steamers and destroy 40 oil tanks in the port city's harbor. Midilli would go on to sink 2 freighters in April 1915 and later sank 3 Russian destroyers, the latter in the dead of night with the help of searchlights from her sister ship, Yavuz Sultan Selim. Midilli sank more Russian ships before being lost on January 20, 1918, when she hit 5 mines in a British minefield. It took just 10 minutes for her to sink, taking 2/3 of her crew down with her. Ironically, one of the biggest naval losses for the Ottomans during World War I was a German ship that went down consisting of an almost entirely German crew. Other important ships in the Ottoman Navy would be its 2 pre-dreadnought battleships, the Barbaros Hayreddin and Turgut Reis. Both ships would play a major part in the Ottoman defense of the Dardanelles during the infamous campaign at Gallipoli. Barbaros Hayreddin would eventually be sunk on August 8, 1915 by the British submarine HMS E11 while out on patrol in the Sea of Marmara. Another British submarine, HMS B11, would sink the Ottoman Navy's sole coastal defense ship, the Mesudiye, on December 13, 1914 in the Dardanelles Straits. The Ottoman Navy had 2 protected cruisers during the early part of the war, both of which were already quite dated. All it took was 1 Russian mine to sink one of the cruisers, Mecidiye, which sank near Odessa on the Black Sea on April 3, 1915. The Russians would refloat the ship and rename it Prut. However, it would be returned to the Ottomans in May 1918 when the Germans captured Ukraine, including the port of Odessa. As for destroyers, the Ottoman Navy had 8 of them. 4 of them were of the Samson class and named Basra, Samson, Tashos, and Yarhisar. Yarhisar was sunk in December 1915 by HMS E11, the same British submarine that sank the Ottoman dreadnought, Barbaros Hayreddin. The other 4 Ottoman destroyers were of the ex-German S-165 or Shishau class. They included the Gayreti Vatania, which ran aground in October 1916, and the Yadigar I Millet, which was bombed by British aircraft in July 1917, as well as the Muavinet I Milliye and Numune I Hamiyet. The Ottomans also had a number of mine layers during the Great War. The most famous of them was named Nusret. We will get back to this particular minesweeper later in this video. As for submarines, the Ottoman Navy's only modern submarine, the Abdul Hamid, had been scrapped in 1910. That means the Ottoman Empire had no submarines when war broke out in 1914. However, the Ottomans did seize a French submarine, named Turquoise, after it ran aground in the Dardanelles on October 30, 1915. The French sub was renamed Mustachip Onbaşı, but was eventually returned to France in 1918 after the Ottoman Empire lost the war. Although a very modest force, the Ottoman Navy saw considerable success in its efforts in the waters surrounding Turkey and the Levant. It was in the Black and Mediterranean seas that the Ottoman Navy proved a formidable opponent, particularly for the Russians who were fighting the Great War on the side of Britain, France, and Italy. There were numerous battles between Ottoman and Russian ships in the Black Sea during the war, resulting in the sinking of 3 Russian battleships. Russia may have dominated in the Black Sea, but the Ottoman Navy ensured that its sea routes were protected. In particular, the focus was on protecting supply routes to the Caucasus front and the coal transportation route that connected Zonguldak on the Turkish coast of the Black Sea and Constantinople to the south. Supply lines were also protected between Constantinople and Çanakkale, the latter being the gateway to what became the battlefields of Gallipoli. There were other battles farther afield, including the battle for the Suez Canal, which was under the control of the British. Turkish vessels were able to mount offensives against the British using the Sinai Peninsula as their launch. The Ottomans had a large presence needed to protect southern Palestine, which they ruled. They wanted to seize the Suez Canal if possible, which is why Turkish naval vessels utilized mines to try and beat the British. The Ottomans were eventually beaten, losing both Palestine and Syria to the British. Ottoman vessels were also active in the Mesopotamia region of what is modern-day Iraq. There too, the opponents were the British, intent on protecting their colonial interests in the region. The Ottoman Navy operated a river flotilla that was heavily involved in laying mines in that part of the Middle East during the war. Initially very successful, this flotilla would eventually be beaten by a much beefed-up British naval and army presence. Besides the raiding of Russian vessels in the Black Sea, probably the single biggest achievement of the Ottoman Navy was at Gallipoli. For the Allies, consisting of British, French, Russian, Australian, and New Zealand forces and ships, the Gallipoli campaign was all about breaching the Dardanelles or Dardanelles Straits. Merely a narrow waterway 41 miles or 66 kilometers in length, the Dardanelles were the crucial passage between the Mediterranean Sea to the south and the Sea of Marmara and the Black Sea to the north. Getting through the Dardanelles would give the Allies full control of the Black Sea and be an enormous respite for the Russians. Russia had also desperately needed supplies sent by the Allies via the Dardanelles. Many historians concur that one of the leading reasons for the eventual collapse of the Russian Empire and, in turn, the rise of the Bolsheviks in Russia was the failure of the Allies to get through the Dardanelles. The victory for the Ottoman Empire was immense, and it was a crushing blow to the Allies. The Ottomans' first major success took place during the night of March 18, 1915. Remember the Ottoman mine layer Nusret? Well, she played a phenomenal role in Gallipoli. She had laid down a line of 20 mines in front of what was known as the Kifez minefield. This was just across from Erenköy Bay, a bay along the Asian shore of Turkey at the entrance to the Dardanelles Straits. The 20 mines ran parallel to the shore, spaced about 91 meters, or a snip under 300 feet apart. The British, who led the Allied invasion, were convinced that they could smash the Ottoman batteries on the shore and defuse what mines there were. What the Allies didn't realize was that the Ottomans had just laid down 20 more mines. The Allied naval attack was arranged in 3 lines of battleships, 2 British lines and 1 French line. In the end, the Ottoman minefield sank 3 Allied battleships comprising 2 British pre-dreadnought battleships, HMS Irresistible and HMS Ocean, as well as the French battleship Bouvet. Another vessel, the British battlecruiser HMS Inflexible, attained heavy damage when it too hit the same minefield. 2 other Allied ships were also badly damaged. There were more than 700 casualties in the Allied fleet. The Royal Navy had suffered its biggest loss of naval vessels since the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. It all came to an end when the Ottoman Empire signed the armistice at the port of Mudros on the Greek island of Lemnos on October 30, 1918. 4 days later, on November 3, 1918, Navy Commander Arif Pasha ordered that all flags on Ottoman battleships stationed at the Golden Horn in Constantinople be lowered. And just like that, the Imperial Ottoman Navy ceased to exist. A once proud navy, centuries old and powerful, just like the empire it served, was no more. It joined the ranks of the imperial navies of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Russia. No war ever witnessed the collapse of so many empires and their imperial navies.